The world of televangelism has always been full of fire, scandal and drama, but nothing could have prepared the Christian community for the explosive warning that recently shook both congregations and social media alike. Frances Swaggart, the formidable matriarch of the Swaggart Empire, has drawn a line in the sand and made it crystal clear. If Pastor Gino Jennings dares to utter another word against her family, she will drag him straight into court. It is a confrontation that feels less like a polite theological dispute and more like a high-stakes courtroom thriller unfolding in real time, with millions of curious eyes watching from the sidelines. For decades, Frances has stood as the iron pillar behind her husband, Jimmy Swaggart's global ministry. She has seen scandals come and go, she has stood firm when critics tried to tear down the empire, and she has been the silent force pushing her family forward while the world threw stones. But this time, it is not Jimmy at the center of the controversy, nor even her fiery son Donnie. It is Frances herself, lifting her voice with a warning so sharp that even her opponents have taken notice. The fact that her target is none other than Gino Jennings, a preacher equally infamous for his uncompromising sermons and his refusal to bow to public opinion, has only escalated the matter into a clash of titans. Gino Jennings has built his reputation by calling out what he sees as false doctrines and compromised churches. His sermons often go viral because of their blunt, unapologetic style. He is known to name names, tear down traditions, and mock televangelists who, in his words, preach for money instead of truth. The Swaggart family, with their multi-million-dollar ministry, lavish lifestyle, and history of scandals, has always been low-hanging fruit for Gino's critiques. And while the family has usually chosen silence as the best defense, this time Frances decided enough was enough. Reports began circulating online that in a recent sermon, Gino made comments that alluded to the Swaggarts' past controversies, mocking their reputation and suggesting that their ministry was nothing but a business empire disguised as a church. Though Gino did not mention Frances by name, the implications were clear, and the internet wasted no time in connecting the dots. Within hours, clips of his sermons spread across YouTube and TikTok, with users captioning it as Gino Jennings destroys the Swaggart family. The comments section lit up with debates, some praising Gino for his boldness, others defending the Swaggarts as unfairly targeted. But then, out of nowhere, Frances Swaggart broke her silence. In a statement that insiders claim was delivered during a private ministry meeting before quickly leaking. Online, Frances directly addressed Gino, "Say one more word about my family, and I will sue you." This is not a warning, it is a promise. Those words, sharp and deliberate, spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the narrative flipped. No longer was the conversation about whether the Swaggarts had skeletons in their closet. Now the question was whether Frances had just launched a full-scale legal war against one of the most controversial pastors in America. Social media exploded with memes, hashtags, and speculation. Frances vs. Gino began trending on Twitter, with users posting mock fight posters as if the two were about to step into a boxing ring. YouTube commentators rushed to upload videos with titles like "Frances Swaggart threatens Gino Jennings," and "Did Gino just get himself sued?" In the church world, whispers grew louder. Was this just tough talk, or was Frances genuinely prepared to take legal action? The image of Frances, a woman in her late 80s, yet still sharp as ever, taking on Gino Jennings in court was both shocking and oddly symbolic. On one side, a woman who had survived decades of scandal, humiliation, and attacks, now ready to defend her family's name like a lioness. On the other, a preacher who prided himself on fearlessly exposing what he believed to be corruption in the pulpit, now being threatened with the very system he often condemned. It was a clash not just of personalities, but of legacies, reputations, and power. Observers noted that Frances's warning carried weight for several reasons. First, the Swaggart family is no stranger to courtrooms. Over the decades, they have faced lawsuits, investigations, and legal battles, tied to everything from ministry finances to personal scandals. Frances knows how to navigate legal threats, and her warning was not an empty bluff. Second, unlike her husband Jimmy, who often responded to attacks with teary-eyed repentance or defensive preaching, Frances rarely speaks publicly. So when she does speak, the entire ministry world listens. Meanwhile, Gino Jennings has never been the type to back down from confrontation. Those who know him predict that Frances's threat will only embolden him to double down, turning the feud into a full-scale war of words. Already, his supporters are rallying around him, calling Francis's threat an attempt to silence truth. If Gino Jennings is exposing lies in the church, why are they afraid of the truth? One supporter tweeted, "You can't sue a man for preaching the Bible." Others, however, see it differently. "This isn't about the Bible," one critic wrote, "it's about Gino making personal attacks. If he crossed the line, then Francis has every right to defend her family in court." The timing of the clash could not be more dramatic, with Jimmy Swaggart's health reportedly fragile and Donnie facing criticism. For his own sermons, the ministry has been under increasing pressure. Gabriel Swaggart, the heir apparent, has been trying to modernize the ministry and appeal to younger audiences, but scandals and controversies keep pulling the family back into the spotlight. Francis's warning to Gino may be seen as her way of protecting the family's legacy at all costs. But here's where things get even more explosive. Rumors are swirling that Francis has already contacted legal advisors about the possibility of a defamation lawsuit. If true, this would mean that she is not merely bluffing, but actively preparing to take Gino to court. Such a lawsuit would be unprecedented in the world of televangelism, where preachers often spar verbally but rarely drag each other into legal battles. The sight of Francis Swaggart's lawyers squaring off against Gino Jennings' defense team would be a media spectacle unlike anything the church has seen in decades. And this is only the beginning. The fallout from Francis Swaggart's thunderous warning didn't just remain within church circles. It spilled into the wider cultural conversation, creating shockwaves that no one could have predicted. For years, religious controversies would occasionally trend online, but this was different. This was Francis, the woman many considered untouchable, finally stepping into the battlefield herself. And when a matriarch like Francis speaks, the entire world pays attention. The moment her words were leaked, "Say one more word about my family and I'll sue," there was an eerie silence that swept across the usually loud and chaotic religious commentariat. For hours, people held their breath, waiting to see if Gino Jennings himself would respond. He didn't, at least not immediately, but his silence only made things worse. Because in the vacuum, speculation turned into wildfire. Rumors claimed that Gino was shaken. Others said he was gathering his own ammunition for a scathing response sermon. Memes flooded social media, showing Francis as a courtroom queen, dressed in robes like a judge, pointing her finger at a terrified-looking Gino Jennings in handcuffs. But behind the humor, there was real tension. Legal experts began to weigh in on whether Francis actually had a case. Could a preacher be sued for comments made during a sermon? Could those words legally qualify as defamation if they attack the reputation of a family as public as the Swaggarts? On talk shows and Christian radio, debates raged. One legal analyst noted, if Jennings accused them of criminal behavior or fraud without evidence, then yes, that crosses into dangerous territory. Francis may actually have legal ground to pursue. Another countered, preachers have always called out each other from the pulpit. This is church tradition. If we start suing each other for words spoken in sermons, the floodgates will open. Meanwhile, the Swaggart camp was buzzing. Sources close to the ministry claim that Francis wasn't just posturing. She had allegedly ordered Donnie and Gabriel to stay silent on the matter, leaving her as the sole voice to confront Gino. This was calculated. Francis knew that if Donnie responded, it would be dismissed as another one of his fiery rants. If Gabriel responded, it could jeopardize his image as the calm future leader of the ministry. But Francis? She was different. People saw her as the backbone of the empire. If she said she would sue, then everyone knew she meant business. But Gino Jennings wasn't a man to be underestimated either. For decades, he had thrived on controversy. Every ban, every protest against him, every country that tried to silence his sermons, only made him stronger. He wore opposition as a badge of honor. So when whispers began circulating that Gino was preparing a nuclear sermon in response to Francis, his followers grew excited. They wanted blood, they wanted fire, they wanted to see their fearless leader stand up against the most famous televangelist family in the world. Days later, at a packed Sunday service, Gino finally broke his silence. With the cameras rolling and thousands of people watching online, he looked directly into the lens and delivered a message dripping with defiance. Let the lawyers come. Let the lawsuits fly. Truth doesn't bow to money. And if Francis Swaggart thinks she can silence me, she'll learn real quick that I don't fear courts, I don't fear lawsuits, and I don't fear men or women. The truth is the truth. The crowd erupted. His congregation clapped, shouted, and stood on their feet as if a heavyweight fighter had just entered the ring. The clip went viral within hours. Suddenly the battle lines were drawn. Francis had made her threat. Gino had accepted the challenge. What had started as a few sharp words was now shaping up to be one of the most explosive showdowns in modern church history. In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where the Swaggart Empire is headquartered, the atmosphere grew tense. Some longtime supporters worried this was the wrong move. The Swaggarts had spent decades trying to distance themselves from the scandals of the past. Why open themselves up to more public drama? But others felt a sense of pride. Francis has been quiet for too long, one supporter said. She's letting these so-called preachers walk all over the family name. It's about time she stood up and said, enough is enough. Meanwhile, Jennings supporters were equally vocal. They flooded social media with messages of support, framing him as the David, standing up against the Goliath of televangelism, wealth and power. This isn't Gino versus Francis, one viral tweet read. This is truth versus corruption, holiness versus hypocrisy. The narrative was shifting fast, and every comment, every clip, every rumor only fueled the fire. But then came the twist nobody expected. Reports surfaced that Francis had indeed spoken with a high-powered legal team specializing in defamation cases. The same firm, sources claimed, that had represented celebrities and politicians in lawsuits against media figures. If true, this meant Francis was preparing to make history. A televangelist family, one of the most famous in the world, taking another preacher to court for words spoken from the pulpit. Legal scholars called it uncharted territory, a case that could set a precedent for churches everywhere. The mere possibility of such a lawsuit sent shivers down the spine of the religious community. Pastors began quietly reviewing their own sermons, wondering if anything they had said could one day drag them into a courtroom. Some even joked nervously that they might need lawyers sitting next to their pulpits from now on. The fear was real. If Francis went through with this, it wouldn't just be Gino Jennings on trial, it would be the entire